So this video for the anatomy and physiology section looks at how we can create movement, how our muscles can contract, and the different types of muscle contraction. So let's start off with some basics. These are the four characteristics or properties that our skeletal muscle has. Now, our skeletal muscle is the sort of bulky muscle that we have on the skeleton, sort of more exterior, and essentially this muscle can contract. It is excitable, and that means that it can be stimulated by nervous contraction. It can extend, and it has an elastic property that will enable it to recoil and shorten. So two important soft tissue structures that commonly get confused are the tendon and ligaments. Now, this picture is focusing on the tendons, and you can see there that tendons attach muscle to bone. So, you know, the fleshy red part of the muscle here is the body of the muscle, and then the white material is the tendon. So you can clearly see that this muscle is attached to a bony structure at both ends of the muscle by tendons. And actually there's one tendon you should all know, and it's your Achilles tendon, which you should be aware of is sort of at the back of your heel, running down from your gastrocnemius down to your calcaneus, your heel bone. So if you think about your Achilles tendon, you should be able to figure out that that attaches the muscle of the calf muscle, the gastrocnemius, to your heel bone. And obviously when the gastrocnemius contracts, it pulls on the tendon, which pulls on your heel bone, and you should know that you end up pointing your toes, and the correct terminology for that is plantar flexion. So also you need to be able to identify that there are two sort of ends, or two types of tendon attachment. We've got one which is a fixed end, so this doesn't particularly move. And we've got this white tendon down here, which is at the moving end, quite frantic moving end, and the fixed end tendon is called the origin, and the moving end tendon is called the insertion. So the muscle originates, or the tendon originates here and inserts here, and this is the end where movement occurs. So ligament was the other soft tissue structure that you need to be quite clear about, and this connects bone to bone. And I've put these images here because your shoulder, so this is your humerus bone and your scapula, and actually you can see that there's an awful lot of white tissue, this stringy collagen tissue, which is very tough connective tissue and pulls the head of the humerus and holds it. Remember that the humerus has a ball on the end of it, and the ligaments pull this ball into the socket, which is your shoulder socket. So ligament is incredibly important to hold bone in place and hold the joint structure stable. You know perhaps that shoulders can become dislocated, and if that happens, this white connective tissue gets overstretched or sometimes ripped, and that's not going to be great. It can bring about re-dislocations. I've also put a knee joint here, so you can tell patella, femur and tibia, and we've got some ligaments that run, cruciate ligaments that run as a cross between those two bones. We've also got ligaments that run, you can't quite see that side, but run either side the knee joint, and that's your collateral ligaments, your medial and your lateral collateral ligaments. And if you sort of fall funny, you quite often have a collateral ligament damage. You might have heard of anterior cruciate, an ACL injury. That's one of those ligaments in the middle of the joint. So ligaments, tough fibrous connective tissue that connect bone to bone, and strong ligaments help maintain joint stability. So let's get on to muscles producing movement. You may be familiar with these terms from GCSE. So we have an agonist and an antagonist muscle in any movement. You need a pair of muscles or muscle groups to create movement. One to pull, one to relax and lengthen to allow that movement to happen. We've got these other two terms which we'll look at in just a moment, synergists and fixators. So these are different roles that muscles might play during muscle contraction. So, an example of a bicep curl. And the kind of answers are already indicated on this diagram, but in the upward phase of the movement, the bicep curl, flexion at the elbow joint happens, and that is created by the biceps brachii muscle contracting. So this biceps brachii muscle here will contract, and as it contracts, in this case it shortens, which pulls on the tendon there, and we have upward movement, flexion at the elbow joint. So in this case, the bicep brachii is acting as the agonist or the prime mover. It's the muscle that really creates that movement. Now, in order for us to flex at the elbow, the bicep needs to contract, but we also need our triceps brachii here to lengthen, and you can see from the redness there that it's quite a long pattern. So this bicep will shorten and the triceps brachii will lengthen. It's not contracting, it's relaxing and lengthening. If it contracted also, as well as the biceps brachii, we've got two opposing muscles contracting. There would actually be no movement that could occur. So we need one to pull and shorten and one to relax and lengthen to allow that curl movement to happen. So the partner muscle that relaxes and lengthens is called the antagonist. In this example, it's the triceps brachii. So we've got a third type of muscle contribution. It's a different muscle altogether, and it's working in a slightly different way to allow this movement to happen. And in this case, the trapezius, so the kite-shaped muscle at the top of your back, is working as a synergist. And this basically helps out, the agonist helps out the bicep by trying to control and reduce other movements. We don't particularly want our shoulder or our back to move doing a bicep curl. We want to isolate the movement to the biceps brachii. So the trapezius in this instance is working as a synergist. We've also got the deltoids, the muscle over the top of the shoulder joint, working as a stabilizing joint. So you may know that the biceps brachii, the origin of the biceps brachii is basically on your shoulder, and it inserts down on your radius and ulna. Now, we don't want the end of this tendon, this origin of the biceps brachii, to move particularly. We want it fixed, we want it stabilized, and so the deltoid works to pretty much hold that in place and control movement there. So the deltoid works as a fixator muscle in this example, and in a different movement all of these muscles would work in a different way. So it's purely for this particular movement that the biceps is an agonist, the triceps is the antagonist, etc., etc. So 4 different terms that you need to be able to explain. The main muscle, the agonist, the main muscle that creates the movement. The antagonist, the opposing partner muscle that relaxes to allow the movement to happen. The synergist that assists the agonist and reduces undesirable movement. And the fixator, which stabilizes the origin of the agonist. And then finally, 3 types of muscle contraction. So when a muscle contracts, it can do slightly different things. A lot of muscle contraction that we use in sport will be the muscle shortening, but it actually doesn't just do those things. So let's have a look at those. The first question perhaps to ask is, does the contraction of this particular muscle bring about movement or not? And that will give us a clue as to what type of contraction is happening. If the answer is no, there is no movement. For example, if you're doing the plank, but there is muscular contraction. Any of you that have done the plank will know that your stomach muscles and your gluteals, your quadriceps, will be contracting hard to hold this position. There is isometric contraction. If there is movement during a contraction, i.e. some movement happens, in this case a squat upwards or downwards movement, this would be an isotonic contraction of those muscles. So let's look at isometric in slightly more detail. As I suggested, there is muscular contraction, but there's no change in length of the muscle. So the muscle is tensing, but is not shortening or lengthening. And as a result of that, there is no movement. You're holding a fixed position. Then this is called isometric contraction, perhaps sometimes called static contraction. If you look at these images though, so what happens to the length of the agonist muscle during contraction in these images? So kicking a ball, The agonist is the quadricep group, and we have to name one of those muscles. So the rectus femoris is one of the 4 quadricep muscle groups. Punching somebody, so the triceps brachii is the agonist in a punch action, straightening the arm or straightening the leg. And hopefully you'll realise that the muscles there are, or the agonists there are shortening. So the muscle length shortens. This is called concentric contraction. So when the muscle group does contract and the length of the muscle shortens, and this would happen in the upward phase of a squat, the rectus femoris, one of the quadriceps, shortens as it straightens your leg to push you upward. We have movement that occurs during this contraction, so this is concentric contraction. It's one of the 2 types of isotonic contraction. So concentric is when the ends of the muscle get closer together, when they shorten. Eccentric contraction is the opposite. So when you're lowering yourself down during a squat, the downward phase, any downward phase, the muscle group, which in this case the agonist is still the rectus femoris, lengthens. So we have got muscle contraction, but in this time the muscle lengthens or increases and movement does occur. It's called eccentric contraction, and again it's the other of the 2 eccentric contractions. So upward phase is concentric, downward phase is eccentric, and that's a general rule to try to give you a clue. But just acknowledge that the agonist for both the downward and the upward phases is the same muscle or the same muscle group. It doesn't swap, and that's a common mistake. So downward and upward phases are the same muscle group as the agonist. So static contraction, holding anything in position, holding a sort of tense muscle but no movement occurring. Concentric contraction, this might help you remember, when the muscle ends get closer. So if the ends get closer, it's concentric. This is when they shorten, so the upward phase of a lot of movements. When the muscle extends or lengthens during a contraction, this is eccentric contraction, so extending the muscle length is eccentric, E and E, or C and C, just ways to help you try and remember. But also, like I said, a general rule of thumb, when anything is lowering or you're landing to control movements, downward phases, it's very likely to be eccentric contraction. Any upward phase tends to be concentric contraction.